Ukraine is done messing around. At the Defense Tech Valley 2025 exhibition in Lviv, Zelensky unveiled a new family of underwater drones called Toloka. These aren't your typical drones, they are Russia's worst nightmares.
Ukraine has come up with a new massive sea drone that could pose a serious threat to Russia.
Ukraine is actively enhancing its capabilities and using long-range weapons. Among them is the Toloka.
Designed specifically to challenge Russia's dominance in the Black Sea and target some of its most strategic assets, including the Crimean bridge.
Now, this new drone is something that Kremlin needs to worry about.
In this video, we'll expose how Zelensky's team is rewriting the rules of naval warfare, why Russia's prized bridge to Crimea may be living on borrowed time, and how the war in Ukraine is taking a rough twist. At the end of this, you'll understand that the Toloka isn't just a gadget. More than anything else, it is Zelensky's eviction notice to Putin. So, first things first, what exactly is this Toloka drone? Well, it is a family of Ukrainian underwater drones designed for stealth missions, including reconnaissance, mine-laying, and direct strikes against high-value targets. In short, it is exactly what Kyiv needed to put the fear of God in Moscow at this stage of the war. Ukraine unveiled Toloka through its state defense industry on September 19, 2025, during the Defense Tech Valley 2025 exhibition held in Lviv. The announcement immediately caught global attention because it wasn't just one drone, but a series of designs. They showed off models ranging from the small TLK-200, which is about the size of a large suitcase, all the way up to the Toloka 1000, which is closer to the size of a small submarine. That's a huge range, and it suggests Ukraine isn't just experimenting, but they're trying to build a layered system of underwater weapons for different missions. At first glance, the TLK-200 is clearly built for tactical missions. The compact underwater drone measures about 8 feet long, or roughly 2.5 meters. It's designed to scout harbors, test defenses, and plant small explosives. Powered by electric motors, it moves quietly and covers up to 60 miles underwater, which is around 100 kilometers. Its payload capacity ranges from 45 to 110 pounds, or 20 to 50 kilograms. That's enough for reconnaissance gear or a small warhead. It's light, sneaky, and disposable. If one gets caught, it's not a strategic loss, it's part of the plan. The TLK-400 steps things up. It's a mid-range drone, stretching between 13 and 20 feet, or about 4 to 6 meters. It runs on a hybrid system, combining electric stealth with diesel endurance. That gives it a range of up to 750 miles, or 1,200 kilometers. It can carry up to 1,100 pounds, which is around 500 kilograms. That's serious weight, enough for advanced sensors or a warhead that can damage ships or coastal infrastructure. Then there's the Toloka 1000. This is the heavyweight. It spans nearly 40 feet or 12 meters and is designed to travel up to 1,240 miles underwater, which is about 2,000 kilometers. It doesn't rely on GPS alone. If Russia jams satellite signals, it switches to internal navigation and keeps going. Its payload capacity hits 11,000 pounds or 5,000 kilograms. That puts bridges, warships, and hardened infrastructure well within reach. If Ukraine can deploy this model effectively, it's not just a new weapon, it's a strategic shift. Russia's defenses weren't built with this kind of threat in mind, and even if half of these specs hold up in combat, Moscow has a serious problem on its hands. With these specs turning heads, Ukraine isn't stopping at show and tell. They're gearing up to crank these out in numbers that could flood the Black Sea. You see, developers behind Toloka have already moved the smaller models from blueprints to production lines. The TLK-200 and TLK-400 are slated for serial manufacturing soon, with the first batches hitting the water for real-world trials. These aren't futuristic concepts anymore. They're about to join Ukraine's growing drone fleet, right alongside the surface boats that already embarrassed Russia's Black Sea defenses. Crowdfunding and government support through platforms like Brave One have sped everything up, turning what began as workshop experiments into a serious weapons program. Each one is cheap enough to lose, but powerful enough to strike, which means Ukraine can send them out in swarms. If Russia thought explosive surface drones were a nightmare, Wait until the underwater versions start probing harbours, stalking ships, and cutting supply routes without warning. What these effective methods are doing is proving that Ukraine doesn't need a massive navy to challenge Moscow, it just needs a swarm. And with production ramping up, the distance between prototype and battlefield use is shrinking fast. Some reports even suggest that one of the smaller Tolokas played a role in the June underwater attack on the Kerch bridge, showing that the system can deliver results where it matters most. We'll talk more about that very soon. Now, of course, there are strings to keep in mind. A lot of these numbers come directly from developers and official press releases. Independent verification is basically non-existent right now. Ukraine isn't publishing test results for obvious reasons, and there's always a gap between a prototype on paper and a weapon in the field. Just because something looks menacing in a slick presentation doesn't mean it's battle ready. But even with all that said, Russia has already learned the hard way that Ukraine doesn't bluff when it comes to drone warfare. Remember, Moscow used to laugh at the idea that small surface drones could challenge the Russian Navy. Then those very drones rammed into the Black Sea fleet in Sevastopol, forcing warships to scatter and hug the coast. They laughed again when Ukraine rolled out long-range drones meant to hit Moscow itself. They're not laughing anymore. The Neptune and Storm Shadow missiles have humbled them so much that Moscow has started evacuation siren drills. The fact is, the Toloka doesn't need to be perfect to be dangerous. It just needs to be good enough, and all indications show that they are. What makes these drones more than just underwater gadgets is how they change the rules of the game. Surface drones make noise, leave a wake, and show up on radar. Missiles are fast but expensive, and they need launch platforms that can be tracked or destroyed. Underwater drones, though, move silently, stay low, and don't show up on radar. That alone forces Russia to rethink its defenses. You can't stop what you can't see, and Toloka is built to stay invisible until it's too late. The stealth advantage goes beyond silence. It's built into how these drones navigate. When satellite signals are available, they lock on to GNSS. If Russia jams those signals, Toloka switches to inertial navigation and keeps moving. No GPS, no problem. That kind of autonomy matters in contested waters, and it's not just where they go, it's how they move. Toloka hugs the seabed, creeping along at low speeds to avoid sonar. Its propulsion system runs electric for stealth, then switches to diesel when range becomes the priority. That flexibility makes it unpredictable, and unpredictability is a weapon in itself. Then there's the payload. Ukraine hasn't released full specs, but the design suggests serious capability. These drones aren't just scouts, they can carry surveillance gear, naval mines, or warheads built for high-impact strikes. If Ukraine can deploy enough of them, Russia won't just have to defend its skies and coastlines, it will have to defend underwater too, a domain it isn't prepared for. That's not just a tactical problem, it's a logistical one. To make this nightmare even more real for Russia, the arrival of Toloka has quietly redrawn the map of the Black Sea. What was once a Russian lake now feels like contested territory. With the TLK-1000's 2,000-kilometer reach, nearly every naval hub falls within striking distance. From Sevastopol to the Baltic, the message is clear. Nowhere is truly safe. Ports that once felt like fortresses now look like targets waiting for their turn. That's the brilliance of Toloka. It doesn't need to win a firefight or dominate a fleet. It chips away at the edges, quietly and relentlessly, up till the giant starts bleeding from places it didn't think to guard. And the irony is brutal. Russia built its military image on maritime dominance. Now Ukraine is flipping the script with machines that make the Kremlin's own backyard feel exposed. This is where the real fear sets in. How do you defend every dock, every tanker, every submarine pen stretched across thousands of kilometers of coastline? You don't. That's why even half-serious jokes about Kaliningrad or Vladivostok hit a nerve. They're not just jokes anymore, they're warnings, and Russia knows it. Toloka brings something new to the battlefield. Unpredictability. It forces Moscow to defend everywhere at once. That's not just a tactical headache, it's a psychological one. Nothing says sleepless nights like wondering if a Ukrainian drone is throwing a surprise party under your bridge. The moment Russia starts asking, where will they hit next, Ukraine has already won half the fight. Stretching defenses across land, sea, and now underwater amplifies the uncertainty, and that's exactly why the Crimean bridge remains the star target. Russia is already stretched thin. Manpower shortages, outdated equipment and patchy modernization have left gaps across its military. Now add underwater threats to the mix. Patrol boats can't see what's crawling beneath them. Surface barriers won't stop something slow and silent coming in from the deep. Toloka forces Russia to defend in a domain it hasn't trained for. And that kind of uncertainty isn't just uncomfortable, it's destabilizing. Specs aside, let's talk about purpose. Toloka wasn't built in a vacuum. It was engineered with a mission in mind, and that mission is the Crimean Bridge. From the moment Russia launched its full-scale invasion, Ukraine understood that the bridge across the Kerch Strait wasn't just a piece of infrastructure, it was the lifeline of the occupation. Stretching 19 kilometers from mainland Russia to Crimea, the bridge funnels everything Moscow needs to sustain its grip on the peninsula. Fuel, ammunition, reinforcements, food, spare parts, and political symbolism. Before the war, Russia had multiple supply routes. Now, with Ukraine systematically degrading rail lines, depots, and convoys, the bridge has become the one artery they cannot afford to lose. Ukraine's military planners saw the problem early and designed Toloka as the solution. Not just a weapon, but a strategy. Surface drones had already proven their worth, striking Russian ships and coastal targets, but the Crimean Bridge was different. Heavily guarded and politically sacred, it required something stealthier, something that could slip beneath radar, hug the seabed, and strike where defenses were weakest. The goal isn't just to damage the bridge, it's to dismantle the illusion it represents. Putin personally inaugurated it in 2018, driving across in a bright orange truck, while Russian media hailed it as proof that Crimea was forever Russian. Every time Ukraine hits the bridge, it doesn't just disrupt logistics, it disrupts the narrative. It forces Moscow to admit that even its most prized assets are vulnerable. That is why Ukraine wants the bridge gone, not just to choke supply lines, but to shatter the story Russia tells itself and the world. Toloka is the tool designed to do exactly that. It doesn't need to win a naval battle or sink a fleet. It needs to strike once, precisely, and make the message unmistakable. Crimea is not secure, and Russia's grip is slipping. If you want to understand just how high the stakes are, don't start with theory. Start with the damage. Ukraine has already taken swings at the Crimean Bridge, and each one left a mark. Big blasts, quiet sabotage, near misses that still rattled Moscow's nerves. Each strike taught a lesson, forced a fix, and raised the bar. So let's rewind. We'll walk through the hits that turned a symbol of control into a symbol of vulnerability, and how each one paved the way for the drone designed to finish the job. The most recent incident came in June 2025. Ukraine's security service, the SBU, released chilling footage of underwater explosives planted near the bridge supports. The scene was almost cinematic. Dark, murky waters, massive pillars looming like sentinels, and then the charges strapped tight against the steel. Ukraine framed it as proof that they could strike the bridge from below the surface. Russia, as usual, tried to brush it off, claiming the damage was minor and repairs were underway. Nothing to worry about. But independent analysts noticed enough clues to suspect that some part of the structure had been compromised. Even if it wasn't catastrophic, the psychological effect was undeniable. Russia now knows that underwater attacks are not some far-off threat. They are real, and they are happening. Step back to 2023 and you'll hit one of the most dramatic moments so far. In the early hours of July 17, 2023, the Crimean Bridge was hit again. This time, 2 Ukrainian naval drones packed with explosives targeted the road span near the 145th support pillar. The first struck at 3:04 am, followed by the second at 3:20 am. The blasts tore through the structure, killing 2 civilians and injuring another. One of the bridge spans was knocked loose, and a massive hole split the surface. Only one lane remained usable, and even that was temporary. Within days, traffic was halted again after a separate strike on a Russian ammunition depot in Crimea. Ukraine later confirmed the operation. It was planned by the Security Service of Ukraine and the Ukrainian Navy using custom-built Sea Baby drones. The timing was deliberate and the message was clear. This was not just a tactical strike, it was a strategic one. It was psychological warfare. The bridge, once seen as a symbol of Russian control over Crimea, had become a recurring target. The attack exposed serious flaws in Russia's billion-dollar defenses, and forced Moscow to rethink its entire approach to infrastructure security. Repairs continued until mid-October, but the damage went beyond concrete. The bridge was no longer a symbol of strength, it had become a symbol of vulnerability. The strike showed that Ukraine could innovate faster than Russia could defend, and that even the most protected assets were within reach. It wasn't just the structure that cracked, it was the illusion of safety. Then, on October the 8th, 2022, a powerful explosion hit the Crimean bridge, damaging both the road and rail sections. A truck carrying explosives blew up on the westbound lane, causing part of the bridge to collapse and setting fire to a nearby train carrying fuel. The flames and smoke were so intense that satellites captured the scene from space. Russia quickly blamed Ukraine, while Ukrainian officials stayed quiet at first. Later, Ukraine's security service confirmed that it had planned the attack to disrupt Russian supply lines. The timing of the strike was spot on. It happened just one day after President Putin's 70th birthday, and shortly after he announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions. It made the attack feel personal and symbolic. The bridge had been a proud symbol of Russian control over Crimea, but now it was broken and exposed. Traffic slowed, repairs took months, and the idea that Russia's infrastructure was untouchable began to fade. This first strike changed the tone of the war. It showed that Ukraine could hit deep inside Russian-held territory, and that even high-profile targets were no longer safe. If you step back, the pattern becomes clear. First came the spectacular hit that lit up global headlines. Then came the surface drones, small but lethal, slamming into spans with surgical intent. Now, underwater threats are entering the picture. Suspected planted charges, sonar sweeps, and the quiet menace of drones like Toloka are shifting the battlefield. Every phase moves towards methods that are stealthier, harder to intercept, and built for deeper damage. At every stage, Russia has been reacting instead of leading, defending instead of dictating, watching Ukraine innovate while its own confidence continues to erode. If past attacks reveal the evolution of Ukraine's tactics, Toloka is the next logical step. The question isn't whether Ukraine intends to hit the bridge. That part is settled. The real question is whether an underwater drone is the tool that finally pushes it over the edge. So let's break that down, not in theory, but in practice. One possibility is simple reconnaissance. Even if Toloka never carried a single explosive charge, the ability to slip under the waves and film the bridge supports is incredibly valuable. Knowing where the weak points are, where repairs have been rushed, and where defences are positioned gives Ukraine options for future strikes. That kind of intelligence alone could justify its development. But of course, the bigger idea is sabotage. These drones are being talked about as platforms that could carry mines or direct explosive payloads. That raises the possibility of placing charges close or directly against the underwater structures that hold up the bridge. And here's the thing about bridges. Surface damage looks dramatic, but if you compromise the supports beneath the waterline, you threaten the entire span. That's why Russia has been stringing up nets, putting patrols in the strait, and installing sonar equipment. They're worried about the unseen. Now, don't get me wrong, this won't be simple, because there are plenty of hurdles in the way. Shallow waters make navigation tricky, and Russian defences are improving, with properly developed sonar able to detect even small objects. On top of that, not every Ukrainian weapon performs exactly like the glossy press releases promise, so we have to take the most optimistic numbers with a grain of salt. Even so, if just a fraction of those claims are real, Toloka creates a brand new headache for Moscow that they didn't see coming. Russia knows this. That's why after every attack, they rush to show footage of repairs, of engineers welding steel, of traffic moving again. It's theatre as much as it is engineering. They need to prove to their own people that the bridge is unbreakable, but each new Ukrainian strike chips away at that illusion. Every time a drone or bomb reaches it, Putin's credibility takes a hit. He promised Crimea would be forever tied to Russia, and the bridge is the physical proof of that promise. When it's damaged, the whole story begins to unravel. That's why Moscow has been pouring resources into defending the Kerch Strait. We're talking radar coverage, fighter patrols, sonar arrays, and probably divers on constant alert. There are even reports of physical barriers being dropped into the water. They know they're playing a game of cat and mouse, and they're terrified that one day the mouse brings explosives strong enough to break their most prized link. But defense isn't the only part of the story. There's also the propaganda war. Every time the bridge is hit, Russia calls it terrorism. Ukraine, on the other hand, calls it legitimate military action against an occupying force. Western media often frame it as a major escalation, and in a way, all three of those narratives matter. Moscow has to convince its people that the war isn't endangering Russian soil. Kyiv has to prove that no target is safe as long as Crimea is occupied, and the world has to decide whether cutting a supply line is a fair military move. That battle of stories is just as intense as the actual strikes. And then there's the escalation risk. For Putin, the bridge is not just infrastructure, it's a symbol of his personal rule. If he thinks it's under real, sustained threat, he may respond with more aggression elsewhere. That's part of the gamble Ukraine is taking. They know attacking the bridge hurts Russia badly, but they also know each strike comes with a chance of retaliation. That tension is built into every drone Ukraine launches towards Crimea. Still, the logic is clear. If Ukraine wants to undermine Russia's hold on Crimea, the Kerch bridge is the bullseye. And with Toloka, they may finally have a tool that can hit in ways Russia has yet to figure out how to stop. Whether it succeeds or fails, the very fact that these underwater drones exist has already forced Moscow into a defensive crouch. Beyond the headlines and heated words, these underwater strikes ripple out to affect more than just soldiers and steel. They touch the sea itself and the trade flowing through it. You see, the Black Sea is more than a war zone. It's a highway for the world's food and fuel, moving Ukrainian grain and Russian oil to markets that stretch from Africa to the Middle East. That's why every new weapon tested there ripples far beyond the front lines. When drones like Toloka slip into play, they don't just threaten warships or bridges, they threaten trade routes that the rest of the world depends on. And the risks aren't just military. A blast near a port or tanker could dump fuel into the water, poisoning fish stocks and wrecking beaches for years. Ukraine has been careful to keep its strikes focused on military targets, but Moscow is quick to cry foul, accusing Kyiv of endangering civilian ships. Meanwhile, every hit raises new fears about whether the Kerch Strait is safe to sail through. If tankers and freighters start detouring, that means higher costs and slower deliveries, especially for countries that already rely on cheap Ukrainian grain to feed their people. It's a delicate balance. On one hand, underwater drones could choke Russia's oil exports, cutting off billions that bankroll its war machine. That kind of economic squeeze might actually shorten the conflict and save lives on land. On the other hand, it makes global shipping more expensive and fragile, with insurers already hiking rates after October's drone swarms rattled Crimea's bases. The truth is, the sea doesn't care who's right or wrong. It doesn't take sides. It just absorbs the fallout. And that's what makes Toloka such a double-edged sword. A weapon that can tilt the war in Ukraine's favour, but at the risk of shaking global trade and turning the Black Sea into a far more dangerous neighbourhood for everyone. Those wider waves feed into the bigger debate over whether hitting the bridge crosses lines or stays within the rules of war. Let's dive into that. But the explosions are only half the story. The rest plays out in courtrooms, shipping lanes, and strategy meetings, where each drone strike leaves a mark that's harder to see but just as real. So let's branch out to another angle of this whole drone versus bridge saga that doesn't get talked about as much, but matters just as much as the explosions and the engineering. It's the question of whether striking the Kerch bridge is even legal, and whether it's moral. Moscow wants you to think the answer is obvious. They frame every attack as terrorism, as if Ukraine is blowing up civilian property for no reason, but that's not the full picture. Legally speaking, international law draws a line between civilian infrastructure and military objectives. The Kerch bridge sits squarely in the second category. It's not just cars driving across it for vacations or commerce. It's the pipeline for Russian military convoys, armoured vehicles, fuel tankers, and logistics trains. This makes it a legitimate military target under the laws of war. And from Ukraine's perspective, that's all that needs to be said. You cut the bridge, you cut the flow of weapons and reinforcements into occupied territory. That's not terror, that's strategy. The moral debate, however, is a bit more complicated. On one hand, there are risks to civilians. If you collapse a section where ordinary cars are driving over it, there's no question that people could be hurt. On the other hand, Ukraine argues that leaving the bridge untouched prolongs Russia's occupation and fuels more suffering in Ukrainian towns and cities. In their eyes, Disrupting that lifeline is not just a military necessity, it's part of ending the war sooner. It's a harsh calculation, but wars are built on those calculations. If you zoom out, the attacks on the Kerch bridge and the rise of drones like Toloka point to something bigger, a shift in how wars are fought. Naval dominance used to hinge on who had the bigger ships, the deepest diving submarines, or the most lethal aircraft carriers. Today, you don't need $1 billion destroyer to change the game. A country under siege can build a small, low-cost drone that forces a superpower to spend millions defending itself. This is asymmetrical warfare at its sharpest. Ukraine is proving that David versus Goliath battles aren't limited to land. They've moved to the water. And it's not just Ukraine taking notes. Every time a sea drone slams into a Russian ship or an underwater system threatens a strategic bridge, militaries around the world pay attention. Expect more unmanned vehicles in the water. They're versatile, cheaper than traditional fleets, and they terrify opponents in ways conventional weapons never could. NATO is already recalibrating. If drones can slip past defences in the Black Sea, they can do the same in the Baltic or the Mediterranean. Western navies are rethinking sonar grids, rewriting doctrines, and preparing for a future where unmanned swarms are the new normal. This isn't science fiction, it's battlefield reality. But NATO isn't the only one watching. Ukraine's drone revolution is sparking deals and defences across the map. In Washington and Brussels, Toloka is more than a prototype. It's proof that Kyiv can turn Western support into something Moscow genuinely fears. Just recently, a Ukrainian delegation pitched a joint production plan in the US. The formula is simple. Ukraine brings battlefield-tested designs. America brings factories and funding. Together, they could mass produce a fleet of unmanned hunters that Russia can't match. Europe is moving just as fast. On NATO's eastern edge, countries like Poland, Lithuania, and Romania are racing to build what they're calling a drone wall. It's effectively a digital shield of radars and jammers designed to stop Russian intrusions. They're drawing directly from Ukraine's playbook, especially how Toloka slips past Russian defences. Denmark and Poland have already reported mystery drones near their bases. Suddenly, Ukraine's experience isn't just a local fight, it's a manual for survival. Even Turkey, usually cautious about showing its hand, quietly recovered stray Ukrainian sea drones off its coast without protest. That silence speaks louder than any press release. This isn't aid anymore, it's the beginning of a tech alliance. Toloka's success could unlock access to systems once considered off-limits, like Tomahawk cruise missiles or Patriot batteries. Every Ukrainian breakthrough forces NATO capitals to ask a simple question. If Kyiv can do this much with so little, what happens if we give them more? Moscow, of course, is fuming. Russian state TV calls it reckless escalation. Kremlin officials mutter about red lines. But Putin's silence after recent blasts near Crimea tells a different story. No triumphant speech, no fiery soundbite, just quiet embarrassment as his untouchable assets keep getting touched. And that silence is a signal. Western allies smell weakness and they're doubling down. If Toloka tips the balance in the Black Sea, the floodgates of Western money and weapons will swing wide open. What started as a Ukrainian experiment is now a global stand against an empire that thought intimidation was enough to rule. For Russia, the immediate reality is grim. They're scrambling to adapt. We've seen them add air defense batteries, spread out fuel depots, and launch constant patrols around the Kerch Strait. They know every hit on that bridge chips away at their war effort and their propaganda machine. But there's only so much they can do. They can patch steel, they can post guards on the water, they can scream terrorism on state TV. What they can't do is erase the fact that Ukraine is forcing them onto the defensive again and again. That's where Toloka fits in. Even if Ukraine never uses it to bring down the Kerch bridge, its very existence is a psychological weapon. It says the next strike could come from above the water, on the water, or under the water. Pick your poison. That uncertainty keeps Russian planners awake at night, wondering where to shift resources, where to focus defences, and how much more this bridge is going to cost them. So where does that leave us? The Kerch bridge is more than concrete and steel. It is a symbol, a military lifeline, and a propaganda trophy rolled rolled into one. Every time Ukraine strikes it, even without destroying it completely, they send a message to Moscow. No target is untouchable. The rise of systems like Toloka shows that Ukraine isn't just surviving this war, it is innovating under fire. Each drone, every strike, every test of Russian defenses is rewriting the rulebook on modern warfare. The old idea that only superpowers control seas and skies is falling apart. Smart, creative nations can now develop weapons that tilt the balance against much larger foes. Russia can keep patching the bridge, adding defenses and flooding the airwaves with spin. But the deeper reality is harder to repair. Ukraine has changed the game, and the bridge will never be truly safe again. That is the real takeaway. The Kerch bridge may still stand, repaired and guarded, but its days as a secure, reliable link are over. It is no longer a question of will it be hit again, but when, how, and with what. Whether it's Toloka, a missile, or another surprise from Ukraine's expanding arsenal, the fight over the bridge is far from finished. For the rest of the world, this is a warning. Warfare is evolving faster than anyone imagined. The nations that adapt, the ones who turn pressure into innovation, will shape the future. Ukraine is proving that lesson, one innovative drone at a time.